sessions, you'll know that we've kind of been progressing along and trying to show you the different layers and different transitions that come with, thinking about business and thinking about the new world, the new society that we're living in, especially post-COVID. So today's session is kind of a combination of all that. And the aim of today's session is really to help you understand what are the key business trends that, I personally think, and I think a lot of people out there think will be coming our way in 2022 and 2023. Some of them are already quite prevalent in business and in society, but they're not optimal from a business standpoint. So we're going to be talking about those. And as usual, if you have any questions and want any kind of insights on anything, please reach out to us during the chat. You can use the chat box, or if you really want to, you can ask at the end of the session. So today we're going to be covering quite a few different areas. These are the areas that I think are going to be key going forward. They're very different. So it goes from things like, cashless and contactless payments, all the way to employee experiences, talking about agile organizations, talking about sustainable goals. So we're going to touch on each of these points. But I think as a summary slide, this is kind of good because it gives you guys an insight as to business trends being varied and business trends being different according to the industry and according to your own specific priorities within your business. And some of them, like authenticity, you may not have heard of, but are definitely going to become important. And ultimately, what does a trend mean? It means something that all businesses are going to adopt to try and succeed or to try and get more customers. And whilst some will work and others will fail, I think it's important to realize that as an industry or as a series of industries, people are going to go into this direction. Now, trends are quite important to me because during my career, especially during banking, one of my primary jobs was to anticipate and predict what was going to happen in the years ahead. So thinking about industries and thinking about what was the path ahead for my particular industry or my particular team was really, really important. And for those of you who are managers or want to be managers in the future, part of your job is thinking ahead. It's anticipating what's going to happen. It's preparing your team, your company, your employees for the changes that may come ahead. And embracing emerging trends is part of that. Now, obviously, with something like COVID coming in, it becomes even more important because we missed COVID, as it were, and thinking about how businesses have been derailed or changed and adopted in the last 12 to 24 months is obviously a really daunting task. So hopefully today we help you go through that. And I've had some really big experience on this. I've run some big transformation projects, some big automation projects as well. I'm quite a data-focused guy, so hopefully my insight today it helps out. So the whole idea of I guess the last 24 months, and then what it's shown us is that the whole idea of work is being redefined and reimagined. What we do on a day-to-day basis in our jobs maybe hasn't changed that much, but how we do it has changed. Are we going to the offices? Has our company changed its ethos? Are we focused more on internal upskilling, or we focus more on hiring people outside? All these things have changed in the last 24 months. And I think it's going to be a big trend in 2022. Companies trying to establish what their idea of work actually means. Does it mean hybrid work where you sit remotely and you do exactly the same things? Does the company change its product cycle? Does it change the structure of the organization? And one of the things I've tried to do on this slide is articulate exactly the key focuses that your management and those of you who are management need to think about. So when I say transforming work, I'm talking about how we do work. Are you a traditional physical kind of commercial entity where you have a shop and you do things, and are you moving online now? What is the value of the supply chain that you're doing? What is the organizational structure that you had? Were you all sitting in Singapore in one office and your manager was in the room next to you, or are you in remote places? Is one of you in Fiji and one of you in America, etc.? So the whole idea of work as a concept is changing, and I think a lot of individuals are changing how they feel about working. Traditionally, everyone says, we have a 9-to-5 job, we need to go in, we need to sign in, we need to sign out, we have our hour lunch break. That whole concept of how we work, where we work, and when we work is definitely being reassessed by big organizations at the moment, trying to find the optimal solution for people. Now, if you look at my day, I don't really do a 9-to-5. I probably do a 11 to 10 or 11 to 9. Some days I don't even do that. I work on Saturdays and Sundays instead of a weekday sometimes. And so the idea that corporations are no longer prescribing to you how to work is really important, because you as employees can now define what type of environment I want to work in according to my timelines. And this goes back to kind of democratizing the employee experience a bit more and making sure that you have comfort in what you're choosing. The workforce. I think there's going to be a big focus on, what are we getting out of our employees from a human standpoint? So, computers, artificial intelligence, which we're going to talk about later, have come in and they've changed organizations somewhat. But there's still a big amount of work and tasks that humans could contribute in. It's just that we need to rethink about where that human potential lies. So workforces are looking into that. They're looking at, where am I going to get the best out of my employees? Is it going to be in the coding side? Is it going to be in the sales side? Is it going to be in the HR side? Whatever. And they're thinking about where best human potential lies. And that's a big social shift that we're seeing now. And you can see a lot of companies now trying to upskill their staff in areas of technology, areas where they can contribute from a more imaginative and creative standpoint than the prior traditional ways of, just doing kind of number generation or data entry, things like that. The other thing is, the workplace itself is transforming, this whole phygital workspace, the idea that you have a physical and a digital workspace at the same time. We are seeing the metaverse playing a big role in 2022. And I think the metaverse is going to be a huge thing. Where am I working? Am I working within the confines of my screen? Am I working in a metaverse environment with avatars? Am I working in a physical environment where I need to go and shake people's hands, where I need to go collect the mail, where I need to go and, reboot my computer? It's really going to change about in the next 12 months. And I think we're still unsure about where that's going to sit. And I think the metaverse in particular, as with the whole kind of digital frameworks that companies adopt, is going to determine really where people sit. I mean, I personally wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years' time, we see environments where people don't go to work at all. Now, they may go to work for social reasons, because they need some element of interaction with their people. But if we have countries or societies or environments that have a completely enabled strong digital infrastructure, then why would you go to work? If internet capacity is at a premium, why would you go to work just to use their landline and hard lines? Things like that. And that's obviously going to change the way people lead teams. It's obviously going to change the work culture that you're involved in. How do I get my staff to still be comrades? How do I get them to talk to each other? How do I get them to have coffee breaks, but on a digital level? How do I get them to have Christmas parties and enjoy themselves? How do I get that balance? And I think this is really key. And one of the things that I'm seeing in particular is a big shift the way Western countries are doing this as opposed to Asian countries. And I think Asian countries are a bit more phygital. They're a bit more aware and prepared for the idea that we may be just facing a digital workplace going forward. And in the West, they haven't adopted that as fast as yet. And if you look at some of the big companies globally, like the Googles, the Facebooks, etc., they've said, they don't expect anyone in the office really going forward. But what does that mean? Does that mean that their level or their capacity of success is going to go down? Or does it mean that actually they're ready and all their meta environments are going to actually lead to the new generation of work? So these are things that I think are worth considering. So going back onto this whole new workplace concept, I think this is really prevalent, and I talked about it at a high level, but let's kind of break it down now. Like, one of the things I'm doing a lot of projects on is working with some companies and helping them understand, where do they want to work from? Okay, do they want an office? And in some cases, they need a fixed office because that's where they want to greet clients. That's where they show their products, things like that. Or do they want to be fully digital, right? Do they want to have that full, all their employees at home, all their employees working remotely, and they rely on team building tools and meeting and conference call tools to kind of bring the whole thing together. So for those of you who run your businesses or who are involved in kind of HR decision making, think about where you want your team to sit. Now, it's very easy to say that after a while of remote working, people get bored and people want to work on site. Well, that doesn't always necessarily happen. Some people just generally prefer working remotely. Some people prefer working on site. So understanding where the employees actually view this and sit is important, because whilst you don't have to listen to the employees, it's definitely going to affect your hiring policy. So for instance, now if I'm hiring, say, a marketing lead, I have absolutely no limitations as to where that person needs to sit. she or he can sit in America, she or he can sit in Hong Kong, she or she can hit in an island in the Maldives, wherever they are. And one or two of the companies I'm working with actually have fully remote teams where every individual in that organization is sitting in a different location. And that's a really, really important idea to conceptualize and figure out which part of that Venn diagram do you want to sit in. And there's no right answer. The right answer is what gives your clients and your customers the optimal product and optimal solution that you're offering them, the optimal client experience. That's really important. So don't be scared to share your views with your employee. Don't be scared, if you're a manager, to vocalize your views as well about how you want your team to sit and where you want them to sit. And no answer is perfect initially. It's going to be an evolution. It's going to be an evolution of internet and hardware and things like that. So also going to be an evolution of employee morale, employee well-being. Can I look after my employees if they're not on site with me? Can I look after my employees if they're in an island in the Maldives? Things like that. So the whole idea of a new workplace concept is really, really important. And I think the world has shifted. And as soon as COVID hit us, it was like, well, we all need to be remote. And now people are actually realizing, well, we don't really like being remote too much. Okay. And some people are like, well, I want to be in the office. Some people are like, I want to work in the office Monday to Wednesday and Thursday, Friday. I want to be remote. So there's a different dynamic to this, which we all need to understand. And you need to think of this complementary to your own personal circumstances. You know, do you have children? Do you like being at home because it allows you to do a second job? Do you like being at home because it allows you to eat more healthy food or whatever, right? And these things are important in the context of workplace concept. The big thing, and this is a really big thing for me, and I never understate this, because to me, I think it's going to define pretty much company success for the next 10 to 20 years. This idea of data and the usage of data as an asset. Now, one key thing to get off the table straight away: what's the difference between data and information? Okay, so essentially data is a singular identifier. Okay, it can be a name, it can be a date, it can be whatever. Information is a collation of data. Okay, it's how you process various pieces of data to get something valuable out of it. Now, this is a really, really important concept, how organizations embrace data, because in the age of the computer, in the age of the internet, data has become even more powerful day by day. And I'm not trying to overstate that. And I think it's valid. And the reason it's valid is because that's how people are making money now, you know. And how do they make money from data? They're analyzing more. So they're analyzing their customers, they're analyzing their products, they're analyzing what the market has. And through that, they're able to get more analytics. They're able to get more interpretation and evaluation as to, you know, what is best for my company. What do my customers want? What do my employees want? Where am I spending too much money? Where am I not spending enough money? And the root of all of this is data. It drives your business strategy. It's something that can be useful, not just now, but in kind of rehashing the past and learning from your mistakes, but also 100% in the future, defining what you're going to do going forward, defining how many people to hire, what customers you're going to adopt, things like that. Data is the root of everything. There isn't a business decision made out there that does not rely on some set of data. Whether you're selling, you know, hats in the market, whether you're trading crypto, whether you're selling, you know, cars for Tesla or whatever, it's all rooted in data. And I think one of the things I'd always encourage people, especially in the startup community, and those of you just starting your career or in middle management, never underestimate how much you learn and utilize data. Those of you who are really hoping to go really far in your career, whether as entrepreneurs or as employees, get a good grasp of data, learn some good data science skills, some good data management skills, because I think this is going to be really key from, you know, essentially differentiating an average employee to a really strong value-added employee. I always hire people who can take a set of data and extrapolate information and analytics and something more profound out of it. And one of my interview questions that I always give people is, please tell me what you make of this set of data. And I give them a set of data, and some people just say, well, you know, 5 + 5 = 10. Some people say, well, actually, we must think about where this data comes out, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important. And data as a concept is really, really, really key. And to take it at its most granular level, okay? At its most granular level. So those of you who have businesses where, you know, you're selling something, All that information, whether you sell or you don't sell, is a piece of data. When you approach someone, it's a piece of data. What time you approach them is a piece of data. Whether they said yes or no is a piece of data. How much they said yes for is a piece of data. That information, even if it's not useful to you, will be useful to somewhere else. And this is why a lot of people are just collecting data to sell on to others. And that's why data monetization has become a really big sub-industry in its own right. And you can see this. One of the easiest ways to see this is influencers. Influencers have no idea who are following them, other than their names. They have no idea who's following them. But as they go through 1,000 followers, to 10,000 followers, to 1 million followers, to 10 million followers, that piece of data becomes valuable to marketing companies, and they pay influencers as a result of that. So data in its own small organic right is really, really important and cannot be overstated. Leading on from data, I thought it'd be really key to talk about blockchain and crypto. I mean, coming into 2022, for those of you who read anything on the kind of finance side, you'll see that everything has been about kind of NFTs, about gaming, about, you know, the drop in Bitcoin's value, things like that. And obviously this has been going on in the background kind of for the last 5, 6, 7 years, but people have only really grasped it now. And the difference is blockchain is obviously the underlying technology, but it leads to things like cryptos and NFTs, etc. And this may not be relevant to all of you from a core business principle, but it's definitely relevant to all of you from other standpoints, like privacy, like how do you store your transactions, how do you store your assets, how do you do KYC, things like that. So whilst blockchain itself may not be something you think, well, it needs to be a core business, you know, value or core business principle within my company, it should be somewhere within there, because that's the way society and business are trending in terms of the use of blockchain. So let's take a few examples of, you know, how cash, blockchain, crypto are going to impact us. One is this idea of contactless payments. So we all have a wallet or a purse, and most of us probably still have some notes or some coins in there. Well, that's probably going to change in the future. Are we going to be able to go cashless? Are we going to embrace an environment where we use our phones? Maybe we even use maybe we still use our card. Maybe we don't use our card. Maybe everything's done through wallet. That type of universal contactless payment environment is going to be quite key going forward. And this is key, not just from a consumer standpoint of how do I pay for things. It's key from a merchant standpoint, because you're offering more channels for people to pay for things. So for instance, if you're selling hot dogs in a stadium, football stadium, and, you know, at the moment you're only taking cash, imagine next week if you could take wallet, you could take Grab, or you could take Apple Pay, or you could take any type of wallet that's out there that allows you to sell your hot dogs. So this idea of a contactless payment environment is safer. Obviously, in a COVID world, we don't really want to exchange cash, exchange things that readily. It's also safer from a fraud standpoint. Everything is usually run back on the blockchain, so you can trace transactions, reduces the threat of corruption and fraud. Everything is logged independently. And it also promotes an idea that society inclusion is there. So we're all running from the same, you know, we're all starting from the same point. And I think one of the most important factors in all this is to ensure that if we do go cashless as a society, everyone is part of that process. And that's where financial inclusion comes in, because financial inclusion essentially means that everyone has access to the same products, same technology, financial technology and services as everyone else. So if you think of a country like Singapore, which is pretty much first world, pretty much there's a level of equality within that society in terms of what people can buy, where people can buy it. Everyone has smartphone access. To a country like, say, Indonesia, which has less or greater greater divergence in, you know, some people are in the kampongs and they only use physical cash. Some people in the cities, they only use wallets. So we're trying to narrow that gap down. And financial inclusion is a big part of this. And one thing we need to make sure with all these emerging business trends is that they're not trending and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more important, but they're only getting important for the rich people, or they're only getting important for the people who have access to technology. We need to ensure that financial inclusion is fully done, it's fully inclusive at a point and a rate that faster than the technology adoption. That's critical. Otherwise, you're just going to create more divergence in society. And we can see this in the vaccines. Some countries have full, high vaccination levels because they have access to the vaccines. Some countries in Africa don't have access to any vaccines really at the moment. So you're seeing a big discrepancy in how people are handling those situations. And financial inclusion is really important to that. Now, the whole idea of blockchain and crypto is to decentralize. Okay, what does that mean? It means essentially not rely on one or two linear bureaucracies and linear systems to govern everything. Okay, and you'll hear this idea of democratization of finance. You'll hear this idea of giving power back to the people and people self-governing themselves. And blockchain has gone a long way to lending towards that idea. Now, I'm not sure that we're ready for that at the moment. We could be. And things like NFT have shown me that we still possibly could be, but how much as a society and a majority of society we buy into that is going to be really, really important. And I think your business needs to have an angle or an ethos or some kind of mission, vision, and value towards decentralization to take it forward, because people like that. People want to do business with a more transparent organization. They want to be in an organization where corruption is mitigated. They want to be in an organization where technology, centralized technology doesn't govern everything. People can learn themselves. There's no peer-to-peer. There's no evolution of technology within that governance framework. They want those things. And as a company, I think it's important that you need to be aware of that. And as employees, you need to kind of think of what's my role to play in all this? Do I want to work for a company that promotes decentralization or not? And in some cases, you may not want to work for those type of companies. I'm currently working on a few projects where decentralization is important because the selling point to the consumer is you have a say in how that company is run. So if I'm selling, say, a product, a decentralized product, I'm essentially saying that, well, you, from a governance standpoint, your choices make a difference to how that product is sold and the value of the product and things like that. And it goes away from the whole kind of big bank, big tech theory, but it's important. And I think that's an important business trend that will come our way, probably strongly late 2022, early 2023. A topic that I wanted to talk about, which may seem a bit strange being in a business presentation, but I think it's really relevant, is the idea of education and e-learning. So for those of you who have kids or are studying at the moment, you'll know that the whole education model has been turned on its head because of COVID. We don't go to physical lectures. We don't go to, our kids don't go to classrooms. Everything's pretty much done online. Now, this represents social concerns and social opportunity, but also represents business opportunity for a lot of people. So we need to think about, from a business standpoint, what are the trends that are going to continue in 2022 that may impact the education model? So one is hybrid learning. Kids probably will continue to learn, at least in the short term, in a hybrid way, partially online, partially physical. Are we ready for that? Are we inventing the right education, edtech, education tools to allow and facilitate that at an optimal level? Are our kids in a position where they're best placed to learn at the moment? I would probably argue no. I still think the technology has a long way to go. There's a better way of making it more inclusive, more collaboratory. It shouldn't just be seen as an iPad. It shouldn't just be seen as a computer for a child. It needs to be seen as an environment, as an ecosystem. And that's one of the ways where maybe the metaverse can come in and help out, but we're not sure yet. But it's definitely something coming our way. The nature of education itself is evolving. As teachers, are we prepared? Are we prepared to educate children, as we would have been 5 years ago? I'm not sure, because we all thought we'd be educating children at their desk on a whiteboard, writing things down. Are we prepared to educate a child on phonics over a computer? I'm not so sure. And that also presents another business opportunity for people to come out with more products that facilitate that and make it easier for children to learn and teachers to teach. Is our home environment even ready for that? For those of you who live in, say, the Hong Kong, Singapores of the world, internet access is pretty good. Everyone has access to it, but is it at an optimal bandwidth? If everyone in the country is doing online education, are we ready for that? Will it collapse? Will it not? Does everyone have access to hardware in the way that we need it to be? Not everyone can be doing, lectures off their phone. Some people need iPads, some people need desktops, etc., things like that. And the more social level, the internal factor that we need to consider for kids is, are they focused? Are we, I think as parents, any of you are parents, you probably spend a lot of time telling your child, don't spend too much time on the iPad. But then on the other hand, we're revamping our education model to be more online. So how does that sync? Are we telling our kids to focus on the right things? Are they going to play outdoor less? Are they going to ride their bike less? What's their time management like? A 9 to 5 online education model will not work. But maybe a 9 to 12 might work. And then a 3 to 5 might work. We don't know. So these are the things we need to think about. And for those of you who are in the startup space, even more integral for you to be first movers and disruptors, because you have a chance to develop things that could potentially be game changers. For adults, we all think about education as a kid's things, but for adults, how do you do your postgrad? How do you do your master's, your PhD? How do you even learn anymore? Now, I think there was a good kind of sway and movement a few years ago where people were trying to learn things online. Okay, so people were keen to do MBAs online. They were keen to learn courses on Python online, things like that. But then COVID came in, and we kind of thought to ourselves, well, how does that kind of fit with us going forward? Can we still do that? Are our companies going to help subsidize that? Do we have the money to do that? Do we need to save more money to do that? Is a single degree enough? Do I need courses in technology? Do I need courses in marketing? Do I need other things in place for me to facilitate continual education and continual learning as an adult? So as an adult, there are some various things you need to think about. Is everything just general education, or is it upskilling? Is that conversation with your management team or your manager in place where he or she tells you, you should be learning this, you should be learning that? So as you can see, e-learning has a huge amount of potential. And for those of you like I said, in the startup industry, it's a really good place to start looking at where you can contribute, because I think that's going to be a big thing. And I think the idea that people are going to be spending more time at home and more time in hybrid environments actually will probably facilitate greater education. And one of the best ways of looking at this is just say podcasts. Podcasts are out there and they're doing reasonably well at the moment because people are at home. People have the time to just put their headphones on and listen to something. How will that change as COVID goes away? How will it change as the technology becomes even better, where podcasts can be broken down into segments, or there can be more learning podcasts or things like that? Look at Clubhouse as an example. They've really kind of disrupted. Well, they did disrupt for a while, and now they've kind of plateaued a bit. But how do those changes happen? The next thing I think we've kind of talked about quite a lot, it's about business sustainability. Now, this is more kind of prevalent to those of you in kind of senior management and those of you thinking of starting your own company. You need to start thinking about your sustainability policy. You need to start thinking about how your company, if at all, is contributing to the environment. And that's important. And it wasn't really important 10 to 20 years ago because people didn't really talk about it. People always had corporate social responsibility policies, but they didn't really necessarily think about it from an environment, circular economy standpoint. And I think now for you to have a company that does well or garners enough interest and strong attraction, you need to have policies in place that show that your company is actually contributing to the environment, is doing the right thing. Because consumer expectations now are, well, I want to buy, plant-based things. I want to buy things that, help reduce the impacts of climate change. I want a company that deals with proper waste management, supply chains. I want a company that recycles. I want a company that doesn't use, fossil fuels. So as a company and as individuals, I think it's important to build your sustainability persona. That's what I call it when I deal with companies. It's about going forward and introducing people to the idea that their company has something to contribute to the wider ecosystem and the wider economy when we traditionally don't think about those things. Why is this important? Because one, it's the right thing to do. Helping each other and helping the wider ecosystem and the economy is important. But it's also important because it gives your company a level of value disassociated with its product. So as opposed to, say, an iPhone, which just has value for the phone itself and how many people buy that phone, you can create corporate social values that actually bolster a company's balance sheet and bolster a company's wider value. People like that. People are attracted to that. And you see a lot of the big companies now, they're investing a lot more on circular economy activities and sustainability than they did, 5, 10 years ago, because they want that goodwill value. They want that value attached to them where people see them as a strong, valuable, and ultimately, doing good for the environment company. And I think that's important. And also it's just a good thing to do, because eventually all these issues that do affect the economy and the climate at the moment are eventually going to come back and hit us. So it's generally a good thing to do. Now, probably one of the things you all were expecting when you read about emerging business trends was kind of the impact of AI and ML. So this, I think, has been going on for about 10 to 15 years now. We just don't really know about it so much. And those of you maybe in robotics or logistics maybe know about it a bit more, but it's definitely coming to the fore. So I work on a lot of big projects where I go in and people say, well, Rish, how do I make my company more operationally efficient? Rish, how do I reduce my headcount? How do I process this data faster? Things like that, business transformation projects. Now, 10 years ago, it would have been, I just need to throw a bit of software at it and probably a lot of headcount at it, and we'd probably make things a lot more efficient, outsourcing, things like that. Nowadays, it's about the use of technology to streamline and make processes more efficient. And essentially, that is what artificial intelligence helps us do. It's a concept that a series of softwares and machines can do tasks in a way that are smarter and more efficient, okay? And why does that help us? Because it allows us from a product perspective to get things out there faster. It's a utilization of data argument where data can be processed faster. And ultimately, it makes this whole supply chain more efficient. So whether you're in logistics, you're in healthcare, you're in banking, you're in manufacturing, whatever the industry, AI has a role to play. Now, instead of being defensive about it, if we be slightly more inclusive and think of ways of bringing the AI in gradually, I think it's going to be a powerful thing. And one of the things I'm seeing is a lot of companies missing the boat on this. They think, you know what, I don't have the expenditure, I don't have the cost to spend on this at the moment, so I'll wait next year and I'll wait the year after. But there's a way of gradually bringing AI and predictive analytics and things like that into your ecosystem now that will allow you to have a much more efficient, streamlined infrastructure. And it doesn't matter whether you're an SME, where you're one employee headcount, or you're a big company with over 100,000 employees. There's a way of bringing in software to do that. And the funny thing is, a lot of these softwares are free. So even if you're just one person who's selling products on Instagram, if you set up your Instagram in a specific way that allows Instagram to respond to queries faster or immediately, or tells people smart answers on the back of their messages to you, that's the use of AI. You're using the technology available to you to ensure that the human interaction is limited. And that's really, really important. And I think that's something that everyone needs to look in. Whatever business you're running, unless it's really something that is non-technologically based or doesn't need to incorporate technology, I think AI will be very, very beneficial to you. Just to give you an example, one of my friends, she's a dog walker in San Francisco, and she uses AI to map the routes her dogs walk on a given day. Right? So sometimes they change routes. She sees the amount of food that the dog eats on a day-to-day basis. And the AI software that she uses allows her to predict how much food she's going to need next month, whether the dogs are more efficient at walking one route more than the other, whether traffic flow in one area is that way. And it sounds crazy that a dog walker might go to that extent, but now she has a company that walks over 300 dogs a day, and the company turnover is significant, 8 figures. And her use of technology to modernize and monetize that process has been unparalleled. So that's AI. Now, machine learning. Machine learning is slightly more different, okay? Machine learning is something that maybe some of you probably, haven't heard about, but it's essentially using AI as well, but it's learning more, okay? So how are our machines and how are our softwares and robotics actually learning to give us information that is more pertinent to our business, okay? So imagine, those days we used to process Excel and you needed to get to a figure which may have told you a piece of information that would have been helpful in the future. What happens when you have a piece of technology that could tell you, well, okay, I think you should be looking at buying this amount of produce because of this amount of statistics. I think we should be developing this product because, you know, consumers are going to be moving in that direction. It becomes slightly different. It becomes very, very, very more evaluative and beneficial to a company when you have something that is continually evolving and learning based on the data that you're inputting into it. And that's really important, because as human beings, we like to think we're learning continuously, and we are, but we don't think of it in the sense of a machine or a system. But machine learning offers us that. It essentially says, however much you keep putting into that, I'm going to keep learning, and I'm going to keep developing, and I'm going to keep understanding things in a different way. But I can predict that, you know, if COVID comes in, we need to reduce this cost. If, you know, Bitcoin goes up, we need to decrease our assets here, whatever the scenario is. And you have a friend now, a piece of software that gives you the ability to take some weight off your shoulders and do a bit of the learning for you. And it's really important for companies that want to be agile and adapt to the environment that we're in. Because in a COVID environment, we're very much at the discretion of an infection. We're very much at the mercy of how the world reacts to that. And to process all that information, to process US export rates versus mask valuations in Russia, or whatever the metrics are, is really too much for a set of individuals to do. But if you have a computer that's actually doing these calculations in the background and utilizing this data in a very effective way, I think it can be really, really beneficial. And for those of you in consumer-based industries where you see customer trends, it's really amazing when you can predict what a customer wants. And you see this a lot with recently, one of the biggest examples of this was KFC adopting plant-based chicken, right? So for those of you who don't know, KFC have now said they're going to offer plant-based chicken to, well, essentially an alternative to chicken to some of their US customers. And KFC actually had this idea about 6 years ago. And one of the reasons they had this idea is because they had processed all the data and influx of data towards the vegan and plant-based market. And they realized that that was a growing percentage of the market that they were not able to touch because nobody wanted to eat chicken. Then they realized that plant-based chicken is actually expensive. So they put together all their softwares, and essentially they found an optimal point where they could produce plant-based chicken at an effective cost and also market it in the areas of America that actually have the biggest amount of plant-based consumers. And that's what we're going to see in 2022 at KFC, and we'll see whether that takes forward. So you can see how AI and machine learning goes a long way to actually developing and helping you structure your company from a futuristic approach, but also prepare for what your consumers want in the future. So I think those two are really, really important. Now, this is, to me, probably the slide that you guys could probably relate to the most, okay? So we're talking about business trends in 2022 and going forward. But what does it actually mean from your standpoint as an employee? You know, why does it matter? And do people care about me? Does my organization care about me? And do I care enough about myself? Okay. And I think, and I did a presentation about this a few weeks ago, I think companies are they're in an area now where they're really struggling to understand what their employees want. And they're really struggling to understand how the future of the employee engagement model really works. Why is this important? Because as much as AI and machine learning are coming into organization and taking certain jobs, you still have humans behind that AI and behind that machine learning. You still have salespeople out there. You still have a receptionist. You still have humans in your organization. So understanding how a 2022 employee wants to be treated is really, really important, because employees are no longer just working for themselves anymore. They're not just thinking, I need to go to a company, I need to earn my salary, I need to go pay my bills, that's it. They're thinking about, well, why am I working for this company? Why is my name attached to this company? What does my friend think when she sees my name against this company on LinkedIn? That's the type of thing they're thinking about. So a reflection of the company itself. Strong companies can get a lot of value attached to themselves by having really strong employee engagement models. Making sure that your employees feel that they're part of that company, making sure that you value their opinion and you value everything that they're going through to contribute to the work of that company. Younger generations and surveys have shown that they actually want to work for companies that are contributing more. maybe contributing more to technology development, maybe contributing more to the environment, maybe contributing more to, social change, whatever. But there's a more of an ethos and moral attachment to work than there was prior in the past. And that's really important, because you as a company now can't just say, well, we're making loads of money, people want to work for us. It doesn't work that way anymore. So in 2022, you need to think about what the younger generations in particular, why is it that they're working for me? And if you go through LinkedIn or you go through any job board now, you'll see big chunks of words attached to every job description that say, why work for us? And those are some of the most important sentences in any JD, because people really care about the company they're going to work for. They care about what their parents are going to think. They care about what their partner is going to think. They care about what socially, how socially that company is looked at. And you look at a lot of the big tech companies in America, they're really struggling now because they monopolize those environments, those industries. And a lot of people wanted to work for them because they were big tech. But now, because the ethos and morals of those companies are coming into question, a lot of people are backing away. A lot of people prefer to work in startups and green companies and companies whose ethos is much more transparent and social spirited, shall we say. Okay, so think about that. You also need to understand your employees purely from the perspective of a happy employee is a good employee. We all know that. If you're happy at work, you contribute more. There's more output. So why are we not asking our employees the question, what makes you happy? What makes you unhappy? How can we change that? And that level of interaction between manager and the hierarchy, the C-suite, versus all the other employees is super critical to understanding employee morale. Never take it for granted that your employee morale is good. Always assume it's bad and try to make it better. We talked a bit about employee engagement and performance, communication and transparency. This is really important as the workforce changes, as our idea of work changes, right? End of the day, companies need to learn and have a strong communications agenda that allows their employees to still feel part of something as a whole. Just because they're working in Fiji, just because they're working remotely for 5 days a week or 4 days a week, they still need to feel that they're part of something. And the best way of doing that is for management to be transparent and to have a good communication strategy. Maybe every day send out an email, a motivational email. Maybe every day organize a team meeting. Maybe every week have a town hall as opposed to every quarter. Whatever the strategy is, we need to think about, how do I ensure that whilst my staff are physically disparate and away from each other, how do I ensure that they're mentally engaged and together? That's important. The introduction of AI and ML is something that needs to be done in a cautious way. People automatically think when you talk about automation, business transformation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, these are scary words for humans, because they automatically assume that once these things come in, my job is at jeopardy. That's not always the case. And that's because the narrative around AI and machine learning is that a bunch of robots are going to come and take over my job. A bunch of software is going to replace a human. That's not the case. It creates opportunity elsewhere in the supply chain. It creates opportunity elsewhere in the organization. And it goes back to the company narrative and how they sell that. So instead of being fearful of these conversations, embrace them. And a good HR department will be continually looking to comfort, secure, and motivate their staff in a way that is really, really prominent and optimal to increasing the employee experience. Now, linked to that is this idea of authenticity. Now, I didn't really think about authenticity much until maybe about 2 years ago when I was working for a specific company in the Middle East. And for me, it's about being honest and making sure that your company has some level of emotional connection and transparency to the wider world, okay? I think in the past, people just wanted brands for brands, okay? Now people want their brand to stand out for the right reasons. Not just because people are buying that shoe or because it's cool to have that, but because there is a value attached to it. There's a vision that is socially competent and socially helpful with that brand. So brand authenticity is really, really important to companies and startups in really getting people captivated by the idea that this really is going to be different. This is going to be different from those typical up-down models. It's going to have a much more emotional connection with society, and ultimately it's going to be much more purposeful other than just thinking about generating money. Now, you can definitely have both hand in hand, but it's about really showing that you really are a caring organization. And that sounds a bit wishy-washy, but as we've seen through kind of Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, the millennials, people want that now. They do want that authenticity. And I think it's important because you're going to attract the better staff out there if you can be more authentic. So think about that. Now, the last slide is probably a bit more for kind of managers out there and is a bit more theoretical, but deals with this idea of how organizations just need to change very fast. They need to be much more flatter and agile. What does that mean? It means decision-making needs to be much more, seamless, straightforward, and easier than it has in the past. It can't go through long approval chains. The needs of today are so fast and so just happening so much at one time that it's impossible to have a 1 week long, decision-making tree. Decision-making has to be optimal. And the best way of doing that is to have a flatter organization. And that leads to a more agile organization. Agile organizations are important because they remove the problems when change comes into the infrastructure. So something like COVID came in, the agile organizations found it much more easy to adapt to it because the agile organizations were prepared to actually be flexible. They were in a way to say, well, we can give up that and focus on that. We don't need to go through a huge supply chain. We don't need to go through different levels of management to get decisions made. Budget costs are lower. And I think that's really, really important. For those of you who work in project management, I know there's a few of you on the call who do, you'll understand that an agile project allows more flexibility. It doesn't necessarily always work, but from an organizational standpoint, I think now is the time to make your organization as agile as possible. And the reason flatness is important, a bit like decentralization, is it allows your employees, your partners, your merchants, whoever your institutional investors, whoever's part of that ecosystem, it allows them to be communicated to in a much more faster fashion. And there's much more clarity in terms of, who's in charge, how these decisions are made, what's the governance frameworks, things like that. And obviously the bigger an organization gets, the more hierarchical it tends to be, but there needs to be a hybrid approach for those organizations as well. So think about how your organization, especially as a startup, can be as agile as possible. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to use off-the-shelf technology. It promotes agility, promotes the ability to just plug and play software into the organization as and when you please. Remoteness obviously promotes agility. So think about what level of agility you want your organization to have, depending on the industry you're in, and think of it in a way that the employees that you're likely to be employing for the next 2, 3, 4 years are likely to be employees who want to be part of a flatter organization. It's very rare you find employees who want to be part of a hierarchical organization anymore. People want to get to the top faster. And one way of doing that is to redistribute power and redistribute that hierarchy accordingly. So think about that from that. And I think that's a really important thing. So I'm aware that we've kind of come to the end and I'm out of time. I hope for all of you, you will look at this and within each of your industries or each of your roles at work, you'll see some of the angles that could potentially be important to you. I think that some of them are definitely more important than others, but think about it from your own personal context. And even if you don't apply them straight away, be aware that they're coming into your ecosystem or into your industry, sooner rather than later. Whether it's something like sustainability or AI or authenticity, it's there. It's somewhere there within your industry or within your role on your job now. So try to apply it, try to learn from it. Obviously, if any of you have any other kind of questions or want to dive deeper into any of these subjects, please contact me. I like talking about this stuff, so it's quite helpful. I think we have a few questions, so just bear with me. I'll get to those. The first question we have from Zipporah is, what's the role of teachers in school adapting and rolling out these new education remodeling? What can we do on an individual level? So it's a good question. And I have some reasonably good experience on this because I've got family members who are teachers, and I also work with educational reform as well. There's this idea that teachers only do what the government tells them to do. And I think for thousands of years, potentially that has been the case. But going forward, and we've seen this with COVID, teachers have a really, really important role in telling the government and influencing parents in the new education models that they want to roll out. So if you think about it, if you are a clerk in an office job, you're a clerk in an office job, and used to sign checks and used to write numbers on a notepad, and then the computer came in and you started putting that on Excel. And then eventually you didn't need to put it on Excel because you could just scan the document and it auto-populates. Every job has an evolution. Teaching seems to be the job that has the least evolution from a teacher perspective, because ultimately our stigma and our view of education hasn't really changed that much. Teachers' job is just to educate children. What they educate children on is based on the syllabus and the book that the governments and schools ultimately define. But the mechanism of teaching has changed. We no longer use chalk boards, we use whiteboards. We sometimes no longer use whiteboards, we use iPads. We no longer teach children, using sounds on a radio. We use phonics from YouTube or whatever. So the role of a teacher cannot be mitigated or underrepresented in that whole education remodeling phase. I think it's important that you use your voices, whether that's through unions or through your teaching committees or whatever, to show that you think education needs to change in certain ways. Okay, I know that's easier said than done because of the way that governments run that, but I think it's really important that you voice your change in that. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is each of you choose to teach in different ways. So getting your parents and child feedback as to your ways of teaching is really important and a good way of convincing those higher up that school adaptation and change needs to occur. And don't give up on that fight, because it's a fight that's really easy to just say, well, you know what, the government says this, we need to follow that. But it's also something that's worth fighting for, because as teachers, you know what gets the best out of children and what children need. Government politicians don't know that. Okay, even parents to an extent don't know that. They're not with the children 9 to 5 every day. So voice that, give suggestions. And one of the best ways of doing this from my perspective, and it takes a bit of time, but look at what the ed tech industry is doing. So I work with a couple of education tech companies who are coming up with new products and new automation tools to help education. And it's always tech guys leading that initiative. But sometimes you need teachers to come in and help propagate those conversations and help drive those conversations forward, whether it's the use of, like I said, whiteboards, or the use of certain technology to display imagery or display syllabuses or whatever, mind mapping, things like that. I think these are really, really important concepts. So try to get involved in those discussions. And there are a lot of groups out there that are having these discussions at the moment. One last question before we drop off. What do you think is the one area that we need to focus on in 2022 for a new startup? I think there's two answers to this question. I think one is authenticity, and the other would be the use of data, okay, for me. Now, authenticity is a big word, so it deals with strategy. It also deals with, business value, mission, vision, values, things like that. But I think it's important that you have an authentic presence. Investors and venture capitalists and angels and people who are going to buy your product will always buy into a more authentic proposition than something that just seems like a cash grab. Okay, so I think authenticity is one of them. I think the other thing is data. Always be sure that whatever your idea of a startup was driven on some conceptualization of information. So you've already got data that led you to do that. So for instance, if tomorrow I come up with a startup that develops, a hat that, opens itself for my head, well, it's because I think that people in society want that product. And I would have heard that from my friend or my girlfriend or my mother or whoever. So there's data there. Collect that data. As you go through your startup process, that data becomes ever more valuable for you to develop your product, one, and to go out to investors and say, hey, look, people want this. Or I have the data that backs up my theory, my findings, my hypothesis. So the data is an important thing. And one thing I noticed with startups is they try to go, they think about the data 3, 6 months, 1 year down the line. You can't do that. because by then you've lost the monetizable opportunity, one, and two, you're really unclear as to what drove the decision-making of your production process. So keep and store the data. And even if your product doesn't take off, maybe your data might. Maybe your data set may be valuable to someone out there. And I invested in a startup about 3 years ago where our product didn't go to market, but our data set was bought by a big company and it made reasonable amounts of money. So data, I think, is a really important concept. I hope that answers your questions. Thank you. We are going to have a few more topics between Trynkle and CoSpace Park. We're working on an agenda of items as we speak, so please do keep plugged into our social media to look out for those. For those of you, I mean, I've been quite active on LinkedIn with a few of you, and I know that a few of you want kind of more thorough sessions on particular topics, so please keep recommending those, either to myself or to CoSpace Park. And if anyone wants any advice or anything privately, please reach out to me directly. I'll be happy to help out. So thank you for joining. Thanks for joining all the sessions. I can see some regulars in the crowd. I think there's going to be a survey after this course, so please do take time to do that. And I look forward to seeing you all in the future. So happy New Year and thanks a lot.